Hello DevConf. Thanks for coming. My name is Sebastian Gębski, and today I will speak to you about the phenomenon of the cargo cults and how does it really apply to the software engineering in general. Let's set some expectations first, maybe. So this is not going to be a technical talk, so you've been warned, right? What I do on a daily basis is pretty much I organize the engineering teams and I make sure that they operate in a reasonable way. So if you think about different engineering teams, people of the same, let's say, background, skills, and expertise, in some cases, some of them may deliver tremendous value and some of them are like completely non-productive, even if they try hard. And by productive, I don't mean efficient, but I mean effective. So this is what this talk will be about pragmatism, about lean thinking, about the complexity, and about what we should focus on. I don't really have time to give like a super long introduction. You have all the contact information here, so you can check it out if you want. What's really important are two things. So the first one is that all this talk is based on my past experience, which is pretty much 16 years of participating in software engineering endeavors. So I was a consultant. I worked in startups, in some smaller, bigger companies, in different countries, on different platforms. And I believe that this is the reason why I may have something reasonable to say about that. The other interesting thing is that I love Elixir. And what does it have in common with this particular presentation? Well, nothing, but every opportunity for speaking about the Elixir is great. So, yeah. Let's start our little journey. This journey starts far, far away in southern Pacific in beautiful Melanesia. It's here. And it starts quite a long time ago, pretty much the Second World War and just after the Second World War. So this region is inhabited by quite primitive cultures, native tribes, aboriginal tribes, not really advanced in terms of the technology. But what happens is the Second World War and it changes everything. It's a complete game changer for them. Just because, as you can imagine, this was a theater of the Second World War, especially this part of the conflict, which was between the United States of America and Japan. So it was a quite specific type of war because you can imagine it was different than the war that was conducted on the land. It was more like a marine naval war. These tribes I've mentioned, they were not really involved in conflict, but they've lived there. and the war is not only about the military actions, but it's also about the supply lines. So Americans, they were transferring goods for the army. And for these people who inhabited these lands, it was like absolutely stunning experience. Because right now, they were living in their shacks, in their huts, living their primitive lives. And right now, the iron birds were ravaging the skies. There were some parachutes. On parachutes, of course, they didn't know parachutes. There were things dropping from the sky. And Americans were building the airfields and the airstrips. And these steel birds were landing on them. The airdrops were dropping. And of course, some of these airdrops were hijacked by the locals. And they found very interesting things. Some commodities, some items they could use, tools, even clothes, of a completely different quality that they can produce themselves. It was incredible. It was like the gods have actually descended down on the earth and inhabited these people. So for them, it was like a complete game changer. And these beautiful times have ended because the war has ended. So the Yankees has packed their stuff and they got back to US. And what they left was the military bases, the airstrips, the airfields, and the memories. So what these locals did, and this was absolutely fascinating, and this is why it's called a phenomenon. So what these locals did is they've tried to recreate or get this situation back. So we've tried to create mock-up of the planes. They've started inhabiting these airstrips. They've started to idolize the items of the Western digital culture and civilization because they just thought that this will attract back the Americans, they will attract back the gods, so they will have these new goods and they will like have more tools, more items and this all good stuff back. This was quite naive, to be honest, and this didn't really work out. But the funny thing is, actually I call it funny, but it's tragic to some point. So the funny thing is that according to the official sources of information, there are still some cargo cults in the region. So there are still some people who believe that these gods will get back at some point and provide these incredible things. So as you can see, these people were not just recreating the planes, but they were actually repeating the behavior they've seen on the airfield. So they were wearing these funny goggles, waving their flags, and so on. And no one really knows what they were thinking, whether they were really idolizing, or maybe they thought that this was just animals. So if they create a female plane on the airfield, they will come a male plane, and maybe they will mate or something. But what does it really have in common with the software engineering? Maybe let's wait 1 minute to answer that. Okay, so here's obviously a guy who is trying to idolize a Segway. Anyway, I had some observations when I was thinking about these cargo cults, because this phenomenon was actually known as cargo cults. So basically, clearly there was a technical gap between these natives and this Western civilization that has inhabited them. And clearly, this technical gap has caused some lack of understanding. So they didn't know the nature of the things they've experienced. So what is this iron bird, this steel bird? Why does this thing drop off the sky? And why do we have these wonderful things inside the chest that has just dropped off the sky? And there was plenty of hope. So when at some point the things started appearing, the iron birds were gone, they actually didn't just sit down, sad, depressed. They've tried to do something. So they've tried to get this back. However, they made two important mistakes. So the first mistake is that they were completely mistaking the cause and effect. So they thought that the actual reason why the planes are coming is these airstrips and guys waving with the flags, but it was the other way around. The planes were supposed to come, so this is why Americans prepared the infrastructure. So this is quite a fundamental error. This is quite a fundamental mistake. The other one is that they've made their judgments based just on the visual effects, just on the visible effects. So they didn't recreate the actual plane. They just recreated what they'd seen because they completely didn't understand the nature of the plane. So they just made a mock-up with the straw or wood or whatever they had. And if you just write down a list like that, then it should start to ring a bell. Because can't you recognize that these things actually happen in the software engineering industry as well? Let me start with, it may be not the best way to perform a presentation like that, but I will be quite courageous. So let me start with forming the actual statement. So I believe that the modern cargo cults, which is the enterprises that deal with software engineering these days, they of course would like to achieve a success. A success is usually defined with business metrics of some sort, but engineering has to succeed to get these business metrics, right? So not everyone, I would say many companies do not know how to succeed in terms of engineering. So what they do is they just try to focus on imitating the industry leaders. So, okay, Google has succeeded, Facebook has succeeded, Spotify, and so on, so on, so on. So why don't we imitate them? They know their shit. So why don't we do the same? Then I guess we will succeed as well. The point is that in many cases we do it in a very, very wrong way by just worshipping the visual effects or visible effects of their work. And this doesn't really make much sense, but this is what we do. So basically, what we really know is what these companies publish, and sometimes we associate this success with something which is interesting, it's fascinating, but it's not the reason of origin of the success. Let's get Kafka. Many people associate LinkedIn with Kafka, and Kafka is absolutely superb. But LinkedIn didn't really succeed because of Kafka. Kafka is to some point a side effect of their success, because they had some kind of niche, they were building a product, and at some point they had to scale it out. So they've just created the product which was suited for this particular purpose. Same applies with, for instance, the thingy on the left, so the Spotify model. This is the model that has worked for this particular organization, and they've shaped it to fit their needs. And so this may look quite abstract, so I will go through some particular scenarios I've participated myself, somehow experienced myself somehow, and some of them hopefully will remind you something, or maybe not hopefully, because these are not really the most pleasant situations. And the first one is, I call it the Pharaoh syndrome, and it happens in many organizations. So basically it's about some kind of senior executive who just comes and tells you that, and completely overrides the technical decision of his team. Since Monday, you're doing it like that. Since Monday, we are applying Hadoop. Since Monday, you're doing the trunk-based development. I want monorepo next month. You have to move to monorepo or something like this. And this really happens, and usually at some point it can be very ridiculous. So for instance, I had a real situation when there was a CIO coming and he said that Google does monorepo, so should we. But in this particular case, they had like 50 applications. They had quite sophisticated dependency management system, and they've actually had that automated deployment, which was really, I would say, in correspondence to what their branching strategy and branching model. And he just came with the decision out of nowhere of reading the decision of his own engineers, just because he has heard from someone he trusts out of the organization, or just because he has read that some successful organization does like that. In some cases, it can be like extremely Kafkaesque, I would say, extremely odd. There was a very interesting project, I would say tens of millions of zlotys, when that big company was rebuilding their front-end experience, complete front-end experience. And at some point, the project was almost stopped just because the CIO came and said that according to him, and it was like 2012 or 13, this new front-end should be built using Adobe Flash. And these were times when Adobe Flash was already dead and rotting, and everyone was so enthusiastic about the JavaScript frameworks and so on. But according to him, according to what he's read and consultants he paid or whatever, they should be done using Adobe Flash. It's a perfect case of a cargo cult, right? He doesn't trust his own engineers, but he just believes that there was some organization which has used Adobe Flash maybe 3 years ago to build something that looked impressive. So right now, if they use Adobe Flash, the success is inevitable. So that he didn't care that the success may have been in a different company, different context, different product, different everything. And the second case, it's also quite interesting. How many of you have heard about the multi-speed IT? Can you raise your hand? No one, really. So multi-speed IT is one of the biggest lies in the software engineering. It's basically that every rhino would like to be a unicorn. So they are big enterprises, they have some kind of legacy. So they have some big, usually big transactional system that is created with the technology made in 80s, some kind of closed tech. By closed tech, I don't just mean closed source. I mean closed protocols. I mean no right to modify the code, not right to change the infrastructure, pretty much no choice of different libraries and different tools and so on. And these organizations would also like to be successful. The point is that they are struggling because they can't apply the modern practices if they have a tech stack like that. So what can be done about that? So there's a smart way, which is called multi-speed IT. And this has been coined not by these enterprises, but by smart big brand consultants. So the basic idea is that you get all this legacy, all this stinking legacy written in the 80s, and you put it in the lower tier of your IT infrastructure. And you just acknowledge the fact that this will just not move. This is fine. And then you create another tier on the top of that. And this is your fast-moving tier. And it's made with the bleeding edge, most modern frameworks tool. There you apply all the DevOps practices. There you automate the testing and so on. And then you think that you have like super crazy new modern architecture that supports all kind of projects you would like to perform. The problem is that this is a lie, because you still have this rotting and smelly legacy under the hood. And where is the business logic? Where's the real value? The finger at the top is just a wrapper around the actual business logic, which stays the same. And honestly, I will risk the statement that 95% of these big financial services banking projects, which were supposed to deliver you this new digital value, the new refreshed sites, they've just changed the visuals. They've just changed what you can see. And everything beneath remains the same. This is this lie. And from this big brand consultant's perspective, it's quite cynic. From these enterprises, from the bank's perspective, it's rather naive because they really hope that they are delivering some value. But it's one of the biggest lies in the industry. So they spend millions of zlotys, of euros, of whatever. But the point is that they do not deliver any value. I mean, UX, UI, it's really, really important. But in fact, you're just getting pretty wrapped the same what you had 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago. Another interesting case is, well, I will risk another statement. So Scrum is a disease. Scrum is a very dangerous disease, one of the worst in the industry. I mean Scrum, not Agile. It's not Scrum's fault. It's not the fault of creators of Scrum. The main problem is that we just treat it as a prescription, and I've seen it in huge software factories up to even more than 300 developers. We just think that we take this Scrum guide, 16 pages, we just change our terminology, introduce dailies, and we are so agile right now. We can start next Monday. And the thing is that what it really reminds me, I will be very honest with you, is this very, very old Hans Christian Andersen story, The Emperor's New Clothes. So everyone knows that the emperor is naked. Everyone knows that if you approach him or her at the corridor, but they will not admit that. So it has nothing in common with the real agile, because all what you have changed is just the terminology. And I interview plenty of people. I can't tell that I know all the industry because it would be a lie, but I interview plenty of people. I have like an average of 1 person per day. So I know the situation in different companies, in different software houses, and everyone admits that, yeah, we do Scrum, or the Scrum-like, Scrummy, Scrumish, or something. So of course there are some exceptions, but in general, this is another cargo cult. We just think that it has worked somewhere, and there were like these beautiful stories about the evangelists. So right now we just apply Scrum. And why do we apply Scrum? Because we have problems we just can't solve, and we just think that if we make this a complete makeover, if we start with this new proven, simple 16 pages long framework, everything will be okay. Yeah, right. So this is a lie, and this lie really, really belongs to cargo cults. This is the exact way they were fooling themselves. Another story, it's again about big brand consultants. I guess I have some kind of complex about the big brand consultants. So another question, I was one of them. There's another question. Do you know what is POV, point of view? Not really. So POV is it's like a hive mind official opinion. So what does it mean? The big brand consultants, the global companies that serve the clients which have most money, they never know what kind of project they will get. They never know what their clients will come up with, but they always want to do this. This is quite obvious because they want the money. So this is why these companies mainly consist of generalists. The generalists come and they can do everything, but still, at some point you have to touch the technology, right? So how do you do that? You have to have just one expert in the world, and what this expert does, he sits down and writes the official POV for the particular technology. So official statement of the whole company. And if at some point you as a company have to use ESB on your project and you don't know anything about ESB, you just reach to POV and then you take it as your opinion. Really, it really happens. So there are people who don't know anything about ESB, but they take the official document, which is of course the inner document, and right now they are an expert for ESB. And of course, it doesn't work. Why? Because technology goes just too fast forward. So, and of course, every situation, every project is completely different. So I had a very funny situation not that long time ago when there was a company, they had pretty much no infrastructure, everything was in the cloud, and everything was in software as a service subscription model. So they would have like completely commoditized their own operations, and they were really happy about this because this was like a great cost-cutting option. So they just completely focused on their own platform, on what they were providing to other companies, and they were managing themselves internally in a completely standard way. And at some point, they wanted to replace the ERP system, ERP, which is like a beating heart of the organization. And they took like the industry leader in the software as a service model again, so they wanted everything in the cloud. And the consultant statement was that you have to buy your own infrastructure and you have to put the enterprise service bus, and then you can integrate all this stuff in the cloud. So literally everyone's jaws just dropped. So how can it be? Like, what's the purpose? And how can you even imagine such a scenario? And the answer of the consultants was that if you are a serious company, you have to have an ESB, because all the serious companies do all the integration using the ESB. And at this point, like, I had like no energy to make any kind of discussion because this was clearly a POV, right? So for me personally, it's another sophisticated form of the cargo cult. Right now, what they do is they accept their ignorance. Well, we don't care. It's just an official opinion. What we will do is justified because this is in POV. Someone else takes the risks. And in this case, what it really means is that they deliver the projects. They actually deliver the projects, but the cost is like sometimes 10 as high. The future maintenance is even more expensive. Doesn't make sense, to be honest, but they deliver the project and they usually serve the clients which have enough money to compensate their stupidity. Another interesting scenario, and this one is the one we encountered on daily basis. I call it weathercocks. So what's a weathercock? The weathercock is then a thingy which is in the middle of the screen. So when the screen is, it's usually mounted on the top of the churches, towers, and so on. So when the wind is blowing and is changing its direction, the weathercock is spinning and so on. So weathercocks are the developers who actually tend to change their opinion like on the quite frequent basis, just because they've got bored with that particular technology. So imagine that, for instance, they've delivered some kind of product and with framework X, it was super cool. But after the year when the project was already delivered, it's a little bit boring because there is framework Y already released and it looks so great. And check this tutorial. If we use this new framework Y, we could rewrite this module in 30% of the original time it took to create it. It may be true, who knows? And so at some point, their boss just says, okay, let's do this. So create this new module using this new framework. And you know what usually happens then? So the main evangelist for this new framework leaves the company. And the enthusiasm of other developers drops down a little. And maybe there's another framework Z, that appears. And they all end with some kind of Frankenstein-y something that still works, but there are some regions no one would like to touch, no one would like to modify, no one would like to support. Because everyone wants to do fun stuff. Just because in tutorials everything looks cool, but not everything really meets the expectations when confronted with reality. So isn't weathercocks another example of cargo cult syndrome? What we are doing is we're just checking these tutorials. We think this is great, this will really improve our engineering. But what really happens is we completely forget about what we had. One of the reasons why we want to move to the new framework is because we've completely forgotten about the proper maintenance of the old one. We can use most likely the same patterns if we just keep the old one update, if we just put enough effort to structure it properly, if we think about the quality of the general solution and meeting the actual business need, domain need, instead of toying with technology. So this is why I call it another case, another sample of cargo cult. Okay, I'll skip this one just to save time. So basically, everyone would like to be a unicorn, if everyone thinks that being a unicorn is just because you use the bleeding edge technology, or the bleeding edge method, or the bleeding edge approach to the problem. The point is that being a unicorn is about something completely different. So I was a consultant for several years, so I really had this going on, that there was a person from client, a deceive person from the client, and he approaches me, have you heard about Chaos Monkey? It's so superb. We have such a big infrastructure. Can't we deploy it just to do the same thing Netflix does, so just to improve our infrastructure, its robust, and so on, so on, so on. The main problem is that it may look as a really great way to approach things, but if you really want to try things like Chaos Monkey, you have to really start with the basics things first. And so many of these clients were not really able to provide the proper logging, didn't really understand what is the idea of the proper application monitoring, and had no clue about the incident management in general. So if you don't have the basics, and if you have done everything in a manual way and you want to apply Chaos Monkey, honestly, you already have chaos. I want to dispute monkeys, but you already have chaos, so it may be enough for you, at least for now. And the same story applies for things like containers. So there were literally clients and coming and asking, can we Dockerize our production or something? And then I had to go and chill out, just because they would like to use containers, and the worse, like automated provisioning or managing configuration in any other way than this manually manipulation. It was, for them, it was completely abstract, and they wanted to Dockerize things. So maybe start with the basic things first and don't do shortcuts. This is actually the way I would like to recommend. Of course, same applies for the continuous delivery. So there are organizations which are completely transfixed that if we want to be competitive on the market, we have to deliver more frequently. And what they have next week is they have the integration sprint that takes a month. So why don't you start thinking about, for instance, the proper branching model that really fits your current situation? This is exactly like what I've mentioned in the beginning, that there were guys coming and asking about the trunk-based development. And they were actually releasing every 5 months. So it's if you know this a little bit, this just doesn't make any sense. Because in trunk-based development, you should release as frequently as possible, just to make sure that you are not diverging with your feature branches or something. And of course, like my favorite topic, it also applies to Agile. And hopefully you've heard about that, because this is quite a popular topic. Like Agile is not about the names. I've seen an organization which moved to Agile overnight. What they had is they just renamed their positions. So the operation managers were the product owners, team leaders were Scrum masters, and everyone was like Scrumish Agile since Monday. I won't even mention how it ended. And of course, everyone's favorite topics, microservices, which are supposed to fix the problem of structuring. And of course, they don't fix the problem of structuring. You have to do structuring anyway. So if you can't like tame your monolith, then you have a problem that can't really be solved with microservices. This is why I really evangelize the idea of the modularized monolith. This is something we should really focus on instead of microservices, because microservices is another type of cargo cult. This is the way we think we will solve our problems, but this is the end game. If someone has already structured their code, if someone has already tamed things like coupling, if someone has already defined the product, the areas that can be independently developed, then if they really reach huge popularity, if they really got virality, they can go into microservices and it all makes sense. But microservices is not the first step, it's the end game. It's supposed to be the end game. So if you are really trying to jump on the hype train, you're most likely trying to apply the best medicine on the market, but it's not the exact disease it should be applied on, I guess, at least for the majority of organizations. Of course, there are always some exceptions. So what I was saying, what I was speaking about was mainly about issues on the level of the team, on the level of like, let's say, unit mindset. So it was not really about the particular developers, but the fact is that this is also about the particular developers. There are, like I said, what I do on a daily basis is building engineering teams. So actually the thing called engineering culture is very important in my work, and understanding what is engineering culture and how you build the engineering culture. So I would just tell you my observations. You may agree or not. Actually, some people might get offended. Hopefully not, only Scrum Masters. One thing is, and you really may hate this, but the more people I speak, the more I've convinced myself that the more and more engineers lack engineering curiosity. So we stopped wondering how things work. And I don't mean that everyone should go down straight to assembler and understand every machine binary code and so on. The point is that if I interview a person, for instance, a web developer, and if I ask about things which are related to the framework, things related to syntax, or let's say that DSL specific elements of the framework, then it's cool, it's quite fine. People are able to answer the questions. But then I ask about something which is completely and absolutely fundamental. And can you tell me how does caching work in the browser? What does steer when things get cached and refreshed? And then actually like 5% of the candidates even know what I'm speaking about. This is amazing. We just think with the abstracts on totally too high level. We completely forgot about the things which is in the background, but this is really important. How do you want to troubleshoot the application if you don't know how caching works in the browser? Another good point, another good example. I have a tricky question I ask sometimes. Have you heard about Yarn, Y-A-R-N, this new packaging manager for JavaScript? Oh yes, of course, I've heard about it. It's amazing, it's great, it's superb. It's like completely has replaced NPM in our stack. And then I ask, but do you know what kind of particular problem does it solve? Why do you use it? And what was the purpose? So what was wrong with NPM? I'm not saying that everyone should know the code inside. It's not the point. But at least you should be able to answer the question, why? Not because the hype train. Of course, there's always the question, because there's a hype train, so the old one, NPM, won't be like maintained, and most likely in 3 months. This is some kind of an answer, but come on. So engineering curiosity, we're lacking that. We're not asking ourselves the proper question, I believe. But this is just the beginning. I may skip this. The other problem is what I call a recursive complexity. So I was attending a conference, front-end conference, in the like initial months of this year. It was about one particular framework. I won't mention the name; it doesn't matter. So the thing was that when the conference started, I realized that a big part of the talks were about another framework, which was a meta framework, which encapsulates the original framework. So what? So actually, even the creator of this original framework has admitted that it's just a little bit too complex to use, because there are too many ropes dangling if you want to set it up completely. So they've created another meta framework which encapsulates it. So you use this meta framework, and then you're fine. The problem is that if you want to create the Hello World example, then you're downloading so many packages, you've just created so much boilerplate, then if it works, it's fine. But when something starts to cause a trouble, when something stops working, I'm not really sure how many people in this like a little bit fanboyish conference could solve the problem. To be honest, I have my doubts. And anyway, there's like a complete class of people who actually love web development, but for instance, they don't want to have anything in common with JavaScript. Nothing. They want to do web development, but no JavaScript. So they have all these transpilers. I don't mean that the idea of transpiler is bad, it's not, but there are some transpilers for other high-level languages. I'm not going to do any flames on Elm, but you can't really avoid JavaScript in general because it's still under the hood. The JavaScript is the native language of the web, at least for now. So this is getting a little bit crazy. And there's like the last point, which is absolutely brutal. One of the other reasons why we are like so prone to the effects of cargo cults is this huge chasm between coders and developers. And this is really important, and you will hate me for that. So these two terms are very, very different. Developer is someone who creates the product. It's someone who understands and would like to understand the domain. It's someone who's asking himself a question, why am I doing that, and how this will contribute to whatever effect the business would like to create. How will this earn any money? So this is developer. And a coder is a different category of a person. The coder actually expects a very specific, a very precise specification as an input, and his job, in his opinion or her opinion, is to write this down to syntactically proper code so someone else can test it. So this is the idea of the coder. So, and the current job market is very, very broken. So actually, in more, let's say, commercial conditions, these coders would be put aside. But right now, there is such a big difference between the supply and demand on the job market that the coders like can practice their hobby. The problem is that if you think about the coder is not thinking about the business problems, but about technical solutions. These are like completely different sides of the equation. These are the things which don't have anything in common, to be honest. So if you are thinking as a coder, if you are thinking about the technical solution instead of business problems, then you are just moving yourself only in the technical space. So you are so extremely prone to this cargo cult effect because all what you are doing is you are picking the technology. Which one could like be more successful in terms of what? Technical excellence only? Does it really make any sense? Of course, it's fun, but And these people are domain agnostic, which this is something that I think it's a root of all problems, to be honest. So all those things I've mentioned were effects. So the fact that we have this like coder developer split, it's an effect of something. And what are the real root causes? Let's get like straight down to hell. What are the real root causes? I have 4 diseases that plague our industry. The first one is the opaqueness. This is something we can't really do anything about. So our industry, software engineering, is completely opaque to everyone else. No one else understands it. No one else understands what we are doing unless we provide the visible effect. So if you are not doing front end, no one can tell you, is it like really 90% of stuff already done? Or 50% or 10% or something? You have these perfect magic words. I'm refactoring or I'm fighting the technical debt. In the same time, you may be trying like super fancy new pattern or whatever, and no one will tell the difference because why, how, and they don't know. They just don't know. From their perspective, it's just mumbo jumbo. And this is why we can like hide so many dirty things we do, so many, let's say, different experimentations that never reach production or something. And this is why some of these effects pop up. Another reason is the broken job market. Sorry again, but everyone would like to earn more, and right now the market favors. We can earn more easily because there is such a huge difference between the supply and demand. But what happens is the hit and run tactics. So if you think about this for a moment, the average length of your job contract is far, far more shorter than the product life cycle. So it means that you don't really care about the product. Because why? The next year you will be somewhere else. Why should you care? You are in resume-driven development mode. You care about what makes you more interesting in the job market, what would be more beneficial to you, I guess. And this is, I'm not blaming anyone in particular, it's just a situation that favors thinking in this way. But this is extremely detrimental. Because we do this and without consequences. Why? Because the job market is broken, because they need us anyway. So they have to allow that. But the problem is that it doesn't make us better engineers, to be honest. The fact that we don't have to think about the maintenance or we don't have to care about that doesn't make us better engineers. It doesn't help us build better instincts. And I find it a big problem, to be honest. Another thing which gets quite popular these days, and more people speak about that, is this hello world chasm. So the problem is that everything really looks very simple in the tutorial until you get into the real business scenario. And the fact is that right now our technology, software engineering, it has a minimum threshold, not only in terms of software, but also in terms of hardware. So if you compare it with the physical engineering, the problem is that in physical engineering, to actually experiment, to have some kind of experiment, usually requires some supply, some dedicated production or something. But in our industry, everything is ephemeral. If you want to start something that has been released on the other side of the planet 2 days ago, you can do this. Why not? Try to imagine something you can't, right? So in this world, our approach to risk of trying new technologies, of trying new toys, instead of focusing on providing the business value, it has far smaller, far lower border, a lower threshold than in other industries. And the final one, this is also about the difference between software engineering world and the physical world. In our business and in our industry, we can layer the abstractions pretty much indefinitely. We just set the border when we stop understanding things somewhere. What do I mean? In the physical world, if you're building a bridge, or if you're like building a building, then the things you deal with are made of matter. They are physical, so you can't twist them indefinitely. You can't build abstractions into abstractions into abstractions just because the thing will collapse. There are physical constraints. And software engineering is about code. Code is ephemeral. Code is not physical. There are far less constraints about that. You can put abstractions over abstractions over abstractions. You can twist it up to unbelievable levels. So it's not understandable at all. And this doesn't really help because it causes the complexity to grow. And it's in this particular case, what it really creates, the effect it really creates, is that the whole thing is opaque not only to non-techies, but at some point also to techies. So at some point, the final effect is that we accept our ignorance. Just try to imagine, try to think about new technology, new framework, library, language that was simpler than the most popular predecessors. Can you find any? Of course, most likely there are some exceptions. But in general, the new ones are always one level higher, more abstract, harder to understand if you want to grasp the whole thing. So it doesn't really help, and it's something I find one of the reasons. But enough complaining. What can we do about this? I would say that I personally have two answers. The first one is about the way of thinking. It's about the mindset. The other one is more about organizational aspects. So the first one, I used to call it headology. It's a clear reference to Terry Pratchett, but it has a more proper name. It goes by lean thinking or the lean mindset. And it's not really a framework. There are no roles. Don't worry about that. But this is a way of thinking that has originated in manufacturing some time ago. It was known as a Toyota way. And this guy, his name is David Anderson. He's actually the guy who has brought it to the software engineering industry by the name of Kanban. And the name Kanban is completely twisted. If you hear it, most likely it means something different. So he has written a book. It was 15 years ago or something, and this book is basically about the basics, so the basic principles. But if you want to understand how does Kanban impact modern enterprises that rely on software engineering, I would rather recommend to go for Lean Enterprise. The title may be quite scary, but this is the book written by the Jez Humble. Hopefully many of you know Jez Humble. This is the guy who have created the books about the continuous integration and continuous delivery. But if you are really interested more about the developer's perspective, I would recommend these two guys, and hopefully many of you recognize them. I won't ask how many, but hopefully you do. So these are Tom and Mary Poppendix, and they are one of the most renowned engineers, and they've created plenty of books, and some of them I think are about the lean thinking and lean software development. I can recommend them really. Okay, so I've recommended you something, but I didn't tell you what's it about. So it's basically about some principles. Like I said, there are no roles, like no artifacts, no phases, nothing like that. And these principles, actually, Poppendix mentioned 7 ones. I've traversed them and I would say parsed them and twisted them a little bit so they fit a little bit more my cargo cult topic. So basically, the first principle is to focus on the problems, not on solutions. To think in categories of problems and not solutions. And this is something that sounds weird because there is a business saying that you should actually bring solutions instead of problems. But the fact is that this is the correct one. This is the correct approach. Start thinking about problems. Always think in category of the problems. Solutions will come. Solutions will come if you properly identify the problem. But this is an issue because if you have a problem, the next thing is to validate whether this is really a problem, because maybe this is just an effect. Just go below, go deeper, ask yourself why. Is this really something we should focus on? Do we really have a pain because of our current framework, or maybe we just suck at naming things, at organizing things, at modeling things? Maybe we just have extremely high coupling, and this is not really the fault of the framework. If we rebuild something with the new framework, so if we rebuild it from scratch, we will get rid of the problem for 2 months, but then we will reapply our old problems and we'll get back to the place we are right now. So get to the root, ask yourself why, and identify the real problem. This is that simple. Another principle, it looks very, very trivial, but this is actually something that was too much for Scrum. Evolve. Imagine you are right now, you have some kind of organization, you follow the waterfall process and you find it sucky because you have some problems and you can't solve them. So if you actually make a complete makeover and decide to go for Scrum, you are not just introducing the new items, role, artifacts from Scrum, but you are also ditching everything you've worked out. So there may be some good, and usually there are some good things about your organization. There are some very, very specific things you may be proud of. And right now, you go for the Spotify model because it works for Spotify. Or what about if like some core issues Spotify is facing are completely different than yours? So evolve. Start with what you have. Identify, like visualize your processes, your problems, the way you deliver software. And identify the bottleneck, the problem, something that stops you, something that prevents you, the biggest pain points. And focus on them. Narrow them down. And pin them one by one. And improve. Maybe the proper way at some point will be to introduce, I don't know, like sprints, scrum masters, agile leaders, coaches, whatever. But like get there yourself and convince yourself that this is the way to go. Make it a conscious decision, a headology. Think instead of like following the principle or following the prescription because someone smart in Silicon Valley said like that. And do it iteratively and validate and learn whether you really fixed anything. So if at some point you apply a solution and the solution is named Kafka, just validate whether you fixed something or maybe you've just like got hijacked by your intent to have fun. And focus on the domain. So always think in terms of the domain because you actually, your end game is to deliver some kind of value within the domain. And this is all about the complexity because, of course, we try and we always like to solve complex problems, but there are domain problems and tech problems. And if you start with the domain problems, of course, the first one may be simple and they are usually solvable with simple tech. But then you will get to complex domain problems, which most likely require complex technology. But start with the trivial things and solve them in the simplest possible way. This is that simple. These are really very simple principles, but we still do not follow them on the daily basis, and this is absolutely terrible. And there's one thing that so many people fail at. There is absolutely no, not something like a named tech success. There's no tech success. It doesn't exist. There's only one success, and this is business success. So these two sides have to be aligned, and sorry, but they have to be aligned on the business success. There's just no other way. Your excuses that they've provided like some stupid specifications, but we've done our job. Sorry, it doesn't make any sense. There's just one category of the success. And I've told you, I've said in the beginning that I have like two solutions to avoid the cargo cults. And the second one is more organizational. And I call it skin in the game. And what the skin in the game is about? You as engineers, as developers, should not be, your performance should not be assessed, it should not be evaluated in terms of technical goals. Because this is like the first gate to hell, the first step to hell. Your performance, your payroll, your premium, or whatever you're getting, it should also be evaluated in terms of meeting the business goals. But wait a second, it doesn't mean that like an average developer, a footman in a huge bank should be evaluated just based on the total final statement, yearly statement of the bank. No, it's not like that. Of course, there should be a direct correspondence between the metric you are evaluated based upon and your work. So this metric should be on the proper level. So you should actually work with some business people on particular functionality, and this particular functionality, you should have its metrics, and you should have the same goal the people who work, the business people who work on that have. So it works in startups. It also works in any other organizations. It's not that easy in software houses and for the consultants, but for all the companies, for all the organizations that work on their own platform, that they have some kind of the product they develop and they deliver, this is the only way to go. And it doesn't require any Scrum or anything to have it implemented, to be honest. This is not something you can do as an average developer, but this is something you should push for. Because this really helps, destroying the walls between business and tech people working all together. That's pretty much everything I had prepared for today. So thank you very much for your attention. I didn't really expect that many people, to be honest, as this is not really a technical talk. Feel free to get to me if you have any questions. If you are interested in topics like that, I can recommend you following the link in that bottom. This actually is the link to my blog. And I'm actually quite active on my blog. I think I've hit like 500 posts last month, so I find it quite a nice number. And that's pretty much I had for you today. So thank you very much.